The Fool Doll. Chapter 33 of Chains by Laurie Halse Anderson. Friday, September 27th to Saturday, November 16th, 1776. The autumn passed in a dog-weary haze for me, with much work and little time to ponder or breathe. Everything was cloaked in gray, oyster gray, charcoal gray, pewter gray, mold gray, storm gray, and ash. Scraps of ash floated through the air for weeks and found their way into everything from the butter to the tea. The rains turned the ash to mud. Frost painted the ground to the color of gravestone. Ashes trapped in ice. I flaked ashy too. Mama used to rub the salve of bear fat and mint on us. Winter approached and our skin would not dry and crack. Was Ruth's skin dry? Did anyone notice? Ashes drifted into the hollow places in my bones and slitted my brain pan. I had a fanciful notion that perhaps we had died in the fire, and they were all lost souls, forbidden to enter heaven. When I had low thoughts like that, Curzon's voice would call from my memory and tell me to join him, become a rebel. I told that voice to hush. With the ash so thick inside and out, I had few thoughts to spare for that fool. I figured he was dug in the troops of Fort Washington, which seemed like a good place. What with the strong walls and the cannons protecting it, folks said the British couldn't attack the fort until spring. The men drilled and patrolled, and Sarah and the other soldier wives spent most of their days down at the campground doing the chores for the regiment, washing clothes in a big iron pot, cooking whatever they could find to roast or stew. They did some tidying at the Lockton house and kept the officers fed too. The dirtiest jobs fell to me: water hauling, wood chopping, and chamber pot emptying. On top of that, Colonel Hawkins claimed me for his errand girl, sending me out with messages for his captain, or that sergeant, or a search, or snuff, or hair powder, or almonds. He was terribly fond of almonds. By the time the apples were harvested, hundreds of ships crammed with expensive British goods crowded the docks. The price of food doubled and doubled again. This did not affect the Locktons, nor the rich loyalist refugees who streamed into the city toting bags of gold. We took delivery of enough potatoes to fill the bin in the cellar and had no trouble buying meat. But regular folks burnt out of their homes, and penniless, loyalist refugees on the run from the rebels, they were forced to shelter in Canvastown, the new name for the burned-over district. They used tent canvases to make huts against the standing chimneys and half-crumbled brick walls. They ate beans and rice when they were lucky and begged on the streets when they were not. One day I noticed that the plants grown from Mama's seeds had been killed by the frost, the stalks dead on the ground with shivered paper leaves. A lump of mud stuck in my throat. I'd forgotten to care for them. I collected the few seeds left from the flower heads and wrapped them in a scrap of cloth that lay loose under the board in the pantry, where I had hidden my sliver of lead from the king's statue. As the weather turned colder, Lady Seymour's mind cleared and her body strengthened. She could walk with help and move the crippled arm, but her mouth still dragged at the corner, and her speech was hard to follow. Madame was not entirely pleased whether her husband's aunt was mending. I heard her grumble to Lockton that the old birdie will never die, just in spite of us. A month or so after the fire, I was setting down a clean pitcher of water in Lady Seymour's bedchamber whilst Madame read the newspaper aloud to her. I thought the lady was dozing, but her eyes snapped open when Madame described how British soldiers had looted the City Hall library. They stole books, ruined paintings, and broke scientifical equipment stored there by the professors of the King College. Lady Seymour made Madame repeat the entire story and then demanded pen and ink and paper, fighting her way out of the blankets with her good arm. Once dressed warmly and settled at the writing table, she composed a strongly worded letter about the library destruction to General Howe, Supreme Commander of the Royal Forces, and called for a glass of brandy and a bowl of soup. After that, it fell to me to walk with Lady Seymour along Wall Street on days when the sun was strong. She hired 3 seamstresses to sew her new wardrobe and included a heavy skirt and thick woolen cloak for me in the order. I protested that I couldn't pay for the clothes, but Lady Seymour simply pointed to the portrait of the yellow-haired man, her husband, on the mantel, and his letters stacked next to it. "We will not discuss payment again," she said slowly. "Thank you, ma'am," I said. After the pigs had been slaughtered and fresh pork was for sale in the market, another wave of British officers moved in and set up their camp beds in the second-floor drawing room. The long dining table was covered end to end with maps. The men would stand over them, chins in their hand, trying to figure out how to finish off the rebels. They were now scheming to finish the war in time for New Year. Battles and skirmishes were fought on the north part of the New York Island, though the city was safe. Whilst they plotted Washington's downfall, I dozed in a chair in the hallway in case they needed victuals or bottles of port. Sleep was a rare, precious thing to me in those days. The next day, I was yawning hard as I trudged up to the tea water pump. The November wind carried the promise of snow, and I was glad for the new cloak that Lady Seymour had given me. Soon I would need rags to wrap around my hands. My muddled head did not register the great hullabaloo at first, but my ears awoke. Folks were shouting and hurrying towards the Greenwich Road where it dumped onto the commons. I was not sure what the race was for, but I lifted my skirts and I joined along with it. They got him! They got 'em all! Cheered a red-faced man, throwing both arms in the air. By the time I made it to the commons, I had to fight my way to the front of the cheering mob. The end of the Greenwich Road was lined with British soldiers, relaxed and laughing at their prisoners, captured American soldiers, walked 3 to a row between their enemies through the doors of the Bridewell prison. Was there a battle? I asked as the serving girl next to me. Up the fort, she answered. Them Hessians kills lots. Blood was running like water. They say they fired them cannons from the ship. They blew arms and legs everywhere. Heads, too. I nodded, unable to think of what I should say. A chant started in the crowd and singing. I did not join in, nor did I throw clods of mud as many did, including the bloodthirsty girl next to me. The rebels kept coming in, row after filthy row, most with their heads down, some limping with a crutch or an arm in a sling. Their uniforms were torn and tattered, and a few walked barefoot over the icy cobblestones, flinching when it hit square with mud or rock. They carried neither flag nor weapons. Their breath billowed like they were hard-ridden horses. It hung around their heads like smoke. He was towards the end of the line with the other enlisted slaves, his head bent forward, his face invisible. A bloody bandage was tied above his right knee, and it looked painful to step with his right foot. The only way I knew him was that hat. Never brown, nearer brown than red now, with a rip through the brim and the ring around his ear. The guards shoved the last of the prisoners, including the boy with the red-brown hat, through the doors of the prison and closed them with a loud metal clang.